Bavaria, April 1945. Rain hissed on the armor like boiling oil. Mud clung to our Sherman's tracks, the ground trembled with each distant shell burst. I leaned into the periscope, the glass fogging with my breath. Down in the valley, a line of civilians moved along the road, women, children, the elderly. But they weren't walking freely. They were being herded. Then, behind a broken bell tower, a flicker of metal. An MG-34 machine G*N. 3 men in black coats. One aimed the barrel. Another shoved a woman forward. The radio crackled. Bravo 6, hold your fire. Possible civilians. Wait for recon. I froze. Through the mist, I saw a little girl stumble. An SS trooper barked something and raised his rifle. My hand hovered near the trigger. The words of the order echoed, hold fire. But every second of obedience meant another step closer to death for them. And the question came, cold and clear. What do you do when obeying an order means letting people die? By spring of '45 the map said the war was almost finished, but maps don't show breath turning to steam inside a tank. We were 3rd Armored, spearheading through Bavaria, towns with church spires and cellars full of silence. The Wehrmacht was folding in companies and brigades, but the SS bled in 1s and 2s, like needles hidden in hay, disguise, ambush, withdrawal, repeat. The new order reached us a week earlier, after a unit west of us fired on a column that wasn't a decoy. I saw the faces when the rumor ran the chow line, men pretending to chew. Headquarters printed the rule in red on the op sheet, if in doubt, do not fire. Big letters, loud ink. Safer on paper than in fog. Our net, SCR 508 in the turret bustle, carried caution like weather. Battalion spoke in clipped doctrine, company relayed in careful echoes, platoon leaders translated into whatever might keep their crews breathing. On my knee board I wrote the usual, grid, phase line, call signs, ammo tallies, fuel state. Under that I copied the sentence in red. I wanted to believe letters could carry weight equal to what we carried in our racks, APC, he, Coke's belts, a few smoke. The system made sense from altitude. Reconnaissance first, armor second, infantry close behind, artillery on call. Civilians everywhere, streaming east, west, any way that wasn't toward the front. The SS understood our rules faster than we did. They herded locals forward, hit a machine G*N behind shawls and prams, waited for us to hesitate. When we held fire, they K** led the people. When we fired, they hung the dead on our conscience. We had identification tricks, orange recognition panels folded under the bustle rack, white cloths for friendlies, hand and arm signals rehearsed till our wrists ached. Still, the countryside was a mirror, bells wired to charges, haystacks cut with sight lines, barns that breathed when the wind didn't. In the rain, everything looked like everything else. Division pushed us by the book. Columns by bounds. Formations named like chess openings. We called our tank Red Lion, a superstition carried from Normandy's bocage where names stuck better than serial numbers. Crew of 5. Ford GAA behind us humming 8 easy cylinders when the mixture was right. 75 in the nose, .30 cokes on the left of the main, .50 on the ring for when the sky or the rooftop wanted to bite. The rule worked until it didn't. In the Ardennes we'd waited once, static on the net, the request for clearance looping like a prayer, and lost men who would have lived if we'd moved 30 seconds sooner. After that I learned how orders age in weather. The farther they traveled from canvas tents to wet steel, the less they fit. Still, I carried the paper. I saluted it with compliance until reality contradicted it. The contradiction felt like a mechanical fault you can hear before you can prove, a wrong note in the track run, a bearing starting to grumble. You log it, you keep listening. South of the Isar that week, we found villages empty but for kettles still warm. The dead lay where the roofs had fallen. The living moved in lines, some with carts, some with nothing but rain in their hair. The SS prowled the margins in black coats taken from wardrobes, insignia stripped, cruelty intact. So the context was simple and impossible at once. The system said, wait. The ground said, look again. And I, a lieutenant with a periscope and a red sentence in my pocket, felt the gap widen between ink and mud until a man could fall through it and never be found. Before the armor, before the noise, I was grease and light. My name was James O'Connor, and in 1938 I was a mechanic's son in Springfield, Ohio. The garage smelled of hot oil and chalk dust, the scent that comes from old tires and the floor after rain. My father, Thomas O'Connor, veteran of the Meuse-Argonne, worked with his sleeves rolled past the elbows, fingers missing half their nails, eyes milky from gas exposure in 1918. He fixed tractors, Buicks, and anything else that coughed when it should have purred. He used to say, "Machines follow orders, Jimmy. Men shouldn't unless they make sense." I was 15 when he said it, tightening a head bolt on a Model A. The word stayed somewhere under my ribs. By the time I turned 20, I could strip and rebuild a carburetor blindfolded, diagnose a misfire by ear, weld with my eyes half closed. I liked rules only when they matched the rhythm of the tool in my hand, torque limits, spark timing, valve lash. Anything else was opinion. I met Margaret in 40. She was a teacher's assistant at the local school, all ink-stained fingers and steady eyes. We spent Sundays walking along the railway cut, counting the freight cars by the echo. When the draft posters went up, she pressed one against my chest and said, "Promise me you'll fix things, not just break them." I promised. I think she believed me. Training came the next year, Camp Polk, Louisiana. Swamps, humidity, the smell of diesel soaked into everything. The Army wanted obedience measured in seconds, but I learned instead in sounds, the whine of a starter clutch, the difference between a jammed feed and a clean discharge. I was quick with wrenches and slower with salutes. That combination earned me lieutenant stripes and suspicion in equal measure. The manuals fascinated me more than the drills. Each drawing carried a quiet precision, the way a turret traverse matched its hydraulic line, how the periscope linkage aligned with the commander's seat. The M4 Sherman was a puzzle that solved itself if you listened carefully enough. I used to sit in the darkened hull at night, tracing circuits with a flashlight, whispering their logic. They sent me overseas in late '44, after the push through France stalled in mud. Normandy was already history, the hedgerows looked peaceful, like they had forgotten the blood. By winter, I'd seen the inside of 3 tanks and buried men from each. I learned what happens when the theory of armor meets the arithmetic of artillery. Every sh*T, every order, reduced to a single argument between velocity and steel. When headquarters spoke of discipline, I thought of the garage. My father never shouted at a seized piston, he studied it, found the reason it refused to move. Orders, to me, were the same, mechanical instructions written by someone far from the noise. Useful until the engine started knocking. Then you stopped trusting the paper. Margaret's letters arrived in neat envelopes, always the same handwriting, always ending with, "Come home with your hands clean." I answered once, "They'll be black with grease, not blood." It wasn't true, not after Foy. In the Ardennes we waited too long for clearance to shift position. Static on the radio, snow in the antenna. By the time the word came through, half our platoon was smoke. I watched a driver named Keller climb out of a burning hatch and vanish behind fire that turned snow to steam. That was when the garage words returned, "Machines follow orders. Men follow conscience." After that, I stopped thinking of command as certainty. I began to hear it instead like the hum of an unbalanced track, useful information, but dangerous if you ignore the vibration. I still saluted. I still repeated every order aloud for the crew to hear. But somewhere beneath each syllable I kept a reserve of silence, the part that asked quietly, "Does this make sense?" By April of '45, with the war's bones already showing through its skin, I wasn't fighting for doctrine. I was fighting for logic, for the right to think one more time before the next shell landed. The Ardennes, December 1944. Cold so sharp it turned breath into glass. We'd been ordered to hold a crossroad near Houffalize, one of those nameless Belgian junctions where every path felt wrong. Snow up to the sprockets, engines choking on frost. The air tasted of cordite and exhaust. I remember the date because Keller's replacement, a kid from Des Moines, still had the factory grease on his gloves. We were supposed to wait for clearance to move, division said German armor was shifting east, and we were to observe and report. That phrase again. Observe. Report. Stay still while the world burns. I sat in the commander's seat with the headphones pressed to my ears, listening to nothing but static and the faint clicking of the intercom tubes cooling. The crew was silent except for Bishop, the G*Ner, humming under his breath, a habit he couldn't break. Then came the sound you never mistake, diesel engines where they shouldn't be. Low, deliberate, too steady for American idling. I raised the periscope and saw shadows moving between the trees. Tigers, or maybe panthers, it didn't matter. 4 of them, maybe more. The rule was clear, no fire without identification, no engagement without confirmation. I called headquarters. No answer. The net was dead. Inside the tank, I could feel my men waiting for me to say something, anything. The loader whispered, "Sir, what now?" I didn't answer. The lead German tank halted, its G*N slewing toward the ridge. Snow fell heavier, thick enough to mute the sound of our own breathing. And I waited, for orders, for permission, for whatever God-governed radios. It came too late. The first shell hit 50 yards to our left, vaporizing a tree and everything behind it. The second found our sister tank. For a few seconds, the night turned white. Return fire. I shouted, already knowing it was useless. We were too slow. By the time our G*N found its mark, the Germans were already repositioning. Keller's replacement was hit when he tried to climb out for a better angle. We dragged him back in. He didn't speak again. After that battle, what command later called a delaying action, I learned what delay truly meant. Delay was death measured in seconds of hesitation. We had obeyed perfectly and still failed completely. When the reports went up the chain, the language was clean: losses sustained due to enemy armor initiative, communications compromised. Not a word about how the order to wait had K*led more men than the enemy had shells. I kept the after-action sheet folded in my pocket for months, unread but not forgotten. Every time I opened my map, it was there, a small square of paper that whispered what silence costs. From then on, I decided that radio silence was not a command, it was an opportunity to think. Back in camp, they lectured us on discipline. Initiative within command intent, they called it. A phrase invented by officers who'd never heard metal scream. To them, obedience was geometry, to us, it was survival with variables. I started calling it paper war, the one fought by reports instead of rifles. When the snow finally thawed, the mud swallowed the wrecks whole. You could walk past where Keller's tank burned and see nothing but a ripple of black soil. But under it lay the moment that split me in two, the soldier who waited and the man who would never wait again. From that day, I kept two compasses, one for direction, one for conscience. The first told me where command wanted me to go. The second told me if the order still made sense. They rarely agreed. In January, our division rotated out for rest. The medic said my hearing was within acceptable limits, though I still heard phantom static in quiet rooms. Margaret's letter arrived that week. "You sound older," she wrote. "The radio in my classroom picks up Chicago now, maybe I'll hear your voice one day." I folded it into the same pocket as the after-action sheet. Two voices on the same frequency, one telling me to wait, the other reminding me why I couldn't. That winter became the template for every choice that followed. The memory of cold metal under my palms, the silence before permission, the sight of friendly armor burning while I held a perfect firing solution and did nothing. It was the first time I disobeyed inwardly, even if my hands still followed the rules. The seed of mutiny wasn't anger, it was logic. Orders were maps, I had walked off the edge of one and found truth waiting in the snow. April 25, 1945. The war had the sound of rain instead of artillery. Bavaria was gray, waterlogged, defeated, but not done. Our battalion advanced through the hills northeast of Landsberg, where the road twisted between pine woods and hollow-eyed villages. We'd been told resistance was scattered, pockets of SS fanatics, deserters in stolen uniforms. The kind who sh*T first and disguised the aftermath as necessity. That morning, we rolled out before dawn. My crew was quiet, 5 shadows inside a steel box streaked with mud. Bishop the G*Ner, Ortega the loader, Vitelli the driver, and young Price on the radio. I rode half out of the turret, headset damp with condensation, binoculars fogging every minute. The sky was the color of solder. By 0900 we reached a ridge overlooking a valley. Below us ran a single road cutting through the village of Hinterfeld. What I saw there stopped me, a line of civilians, 50, maybe more, moving along the ditch in clusters. Women wrapped in blankets, men too old for we*P*NS, a child in a yellow coat trying to keep up. At first it looked like another refugee column heading west. Then I saw the herders, 3 men in black coats with rifles. SS. Behind the ruins of a church stood a bell tower split in half. In its shadow, metal caught the light, an MG-34 on a tripod, muzzle trained downhill. I counted the seconds between its swivel movements. It wasn't watching the road for us, it was watching the civilians. I called it in. Bravo 6 to Sunray, visual on possible hostile element, grid 487. Static answered. I tried again. Same result. Then a voice, distant, clipped by weather. Bravo 6, hold your fire. Possible civilians. Wait for recon. Those words again, hold your fire. I watched one of the SS men shove a woman forward with his rifle. Another grabbed the child by the arm. The G*Ner behind the bell tower adjusted elevation. Through the optics I could see the belt feed dangling, loaded. Inside the tank, the crew waited for my next move. Ortega whispered, "Orders." His hand hovered over the ammunition rack. Vitelli kept the engine idling low, track brakes squealing faintly. The sound felt like a heartbeat. I wanted to obey. Weeks of discipline had built that reflex into my bones. But the scene below wasn't theory, it was arithmetic. 3 men, 1 G*N, 1 crowd. The first burst would cut through the civilians before command ever confirmed identification. Waiting would make us accomplices by omission. Rain began again, thin needles bouncing off the armor. I lowered the binoculars. "Loader," I said quietly, "high explosive. Target, stone wall, left of the tower." "Sir, that's civilian area." "I know. 200 yards. Ortega hesitated. Command said. I heard them. The shell slid into the breach with a clean metallic sigh. Bishop adjusted the G*N. I could feel the question radiating from every man inside the hull: are we about to become the next rumor? The ones who fired too soon? I looked once more through the sight. The girl in the yellow coat had fallen. The SS trooper nearest her turned his rifle sideways. I could see his finger tighten. My father's voice, from another life, filled the pause: machines follow orders. Men follow conscience. "On my mark," I said. Bishop exhaled. "Ready." The radio hissed again, someone shouting from HQ, "Hold position, Bravo 6, do not." I cut the volume. The rain drowned the rest. Fire. The recoil slammed through the chassis like a closing fist. The shell struck the wall 2 meters left of the G*N nest, shattering stone into shrapnel. The MG-34 disappeared in the blast. The echo rolled across the valley, thunder layered over thunder. For a heartbeat nothing moved. Then the civilians dropped flat, instinct faster than fear. The SS survivors scattered, one limping toward the woods, another crawling. Inside the tank, silence. I felt the vibration of the engine idling underfoot. "Reload," I said, voice even. He again. "In case they regroup." No one spoke of the order we'd broken. The crew moved automatically, professional as surgeons. Through the scope I saw the woman pull the child to her chest. Alive. The MG-34 was a smear of smoke and twisted metal. That moment, suspended between relief and dread, was when I understood the equation had changed. War was nearly over, but command still measured morality in distances and signatures. I had measured it in meters and seconds. Rain ran down the periscope lens. The smell of burned masonry drifted up the hill. I keyed the radio once more, though I already knew what would come. "Bravo 6, explain that sh*T. I pressed the transmit button, then released it. "Bravo 6, report." I waited until the static settled. "Target neutralized," I said. "Civilians secure." The line went dead. When the sh*T landed, time fractured into silence. Even the rain paused, hanging between drops as if waiting to see what I had done. Smoke rose from the church ruins in a slow gray column, bending east with the wind. Through the magnified glass, the MG-34 was no longer a wee*P*N, just a twisted outline on scorched stone. I felt no triumph, only the low mechanical tremor of the idling engine beneath my boots. Inside the turret, everything smelled of powder and ozone. The shell casing clattered to the floor plate. Ortega reached for it automatically, wiped it with his sleeve, and set it in the spent bin. Bishop kept his eye pressed to the sight, unwilling to believe the target was gone. Price on the radio was still whispering the command's last words: "Hold your fire," as though repetition could undo them. I opened the hatch halfway and let the cold soak my face. The rain mixed with soot, streaking the armor in black veins. From the ridge we could see civilians crawling toward the ditch for cover. No one ran. They didn't know yet who had saved them or who had endangered them. "Sir," Ortega said finally, "orders." I looked down at him, then at the smoking ruin below. "Reload." He again. "Watch the tree lean." Bishop obeyed. His hands shook but his voice didn't. "Loaded." Vitelli muttered from the driver's seat, "They'll court-martial us for that one." "Not if they're busy writing commendations," I said, though the humor tasted like rust. We waited 5 minutes. The forest stayed still. Only the rain moved, hissing across the open hatch. Then, faintly, G*N fire crackled from the east, our infantry scouts sweeping the outskirts. The radio came alive again, clearer now, the tone colder. "Bravo 6, command acknowledges discharge of ordnance without authorization. Maintain position. Investigation team en route. I answered, copy, holding position. My hand trembled only after I let go of the key. Bishop stared at me. Sir, what do we tell them? The truth, I said. We saw the muzzle flash. There wasn't one until we made one, he whispered. He was right. And wrong. War didn't care which. The investigation team never came that day. Instead, a squad of infantry arrived near dusk. Their sergeant, mud-caked and half-deaf from the morning's shelling, climbed the ridge, took one look at the scene, and spat. You boys fired? Yes. Good. He nodded toward the bodies by the church. Those bastards wired the bell tower with explosives. Found the trigger in the cellar. One more step and that whole lot of villagers would have been paced. You did the right thing. When he left, no one spoke for a long time. The crew sat inside the tank with the hatches cracked, rain dripping onto the spent shells. Somewhere below, a child was crying, thin, steady, alive. At 1900 hours I filled out the log. 1 round, high explosive, 200 yards, confirmed neutralization of enemy emplacement. I left the authorization code line blank. Price stared at the omission but didn't comment. The record would travel upward like all reports, through clerks and majors and final archives, each pair of eyes deciding whether to erase or endorse what I'd done. When the radio finally slept, I climbed out again. The valley was darker now, but in the flashes of distant lightning I could still see the civilians gathering around the burned wall. Someone held a lantern. Its light trembled across the mud, glinting off puddles where brass casings lay half buried. Bishop joined me on the hull, helmet off, hair plastered by rain. Think they'll remember it was us? He asked. They'll remember the noise, I said. Not the name. He nodded. We watched as the lantern moved from body to body, checking who still breathed. The smell of wet stone and cordite mixed until the air itself felt metallic. In the distance, a dog barked once and went silent. For the first time in months, I felt the absence of command, not rebellion, not relief, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when the machinery of war hesitates, unsure which cog has slipped. I thought of my father again, of the garage in Ohio, of the sentence he had thrown into my childhood like a wrench into a running engine. Machines follow orders, men follow conscience. That night, conscience had fired one shell. Tomorrow, the paperwork would decide what to call it. I climbed back into the turret and closed the hatch. The rain on the armor sounded almost like applause, but softer, like forgiveness. Dawn crept through a sky the color of G*metal. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, leaving the world rinsed and hollow. I woke to the smell of mud baking against steel. The engine ticked as it cooled, echoing inside the hull like a clock. Ortega was still asleep against the ammo rack, hands black with powder. Bishop sat cross-legged on the glacis, staring at the valley. He didn't turn when I climbed out beside him. Below, smoke drifted in thin ribbons from the church ruins. The civilians had gathered in the road, tattered, exhausted, but alive. A few American medics moved among them, bandages white against the mud. The woman with the child in the yellow coat was there. She looked up once toward our ridge, her face small and unreadable at that distance. I raised a hand she couldn't see. At 0730 the scouts returned. Sergeant Hanley from the 36th Infantry led them, mud from his boots to his eyelids, cigarette clenched in his teeth. He didn't salute, just leaned against the hull. We swept the village. 2 dead SS. 1 MG-34, blown clean apart. Found a detonator in the cellar under the bell tower, 50 kilos of explosives wired to the support beam. Timer rigged for noon. He exhaled smoke through his nose. If that hadn't gone off early, we'd have lost the whole damn village. Civilians, medics, maybe even our forward observers. He didn't ask who fired. He didn't need to. The barrel of the Sherman still steamed faintly from the rain. He flicked his cigarette into the mud and said, "Hell of a sh*T, Lieutenant." Behind him, the infantryman moved through the rubble. One called out when he found a crate stenciled with Sprengstoff. Another pried open a trapdoor beneath the altar and found lengths of wire leading into the street. The place had been a K*LL zone, carefully prepared, patient. The dead SS officer lay face down near the doorway, boots polished, collar insignia still bright. Bishop climbed down and helped the medics carry bodies. Ortega and Vitelli handed out sea rations to the villagers. No one spoke about orders. They didn't have to. The evidence spoke for us. At 0900, headquarters finally broke radio silence. The voice on the net was clipped, formal. Bravo 6, report status. Area secure, I replied. Confirm expenditure of ordnance. 1 he shall. Copy that. Cause of engagement? I hesitated. The truth didn't fit in radio language. Hostile position observed. Immediate threat to civilians. Static filled the pause. Then. Acknowledged. Hold position for debrief. By the time the liaison jeep arrived, the valley was quiet. Major Whitman stepped out, coat immaculate, clipboard under his arm. He surveyed the wreckage with the detached eye of a man counting inventory. Lieutenant O'Connor, he said. You fired without authorization. Yes, sir. Why? I met his gaze. Because waiting would have led them. He wrote something on the pad, then looked toward the church. They tell me you neutralized an MG and a demolition charge. Any doubt about that? No, sir. You can ask the survivors. He didn't. He closed the pad, slid it into his pocket. Officially, this was an unidentified explosion caused by enemy sabotage. Understood? Yes, sir. He nodded once. Good. Make sure your men rest. We move at 1600. And that was the end of it. No reprimand. No praise. Just a hole in the record where the truth should have been. That afternoon the rain returned. We idled the tank near the roadside while engineers cleared debris. I watched the villagers leave, some on carts, some on foot. The woman with the yellow-coated child passed close to our hull. The girl waved, shy, uncertain whether to thank or fear us. Her mother whispered something in German I couldn't catch. Ortega leaned out of the driver's hatch. What did she say? Something about angels, I guessed. But she looked scared of them. He nodded. Can't blame her. Ours are loud. When we finally rolled out, the road still smelled of explosives and wet stone. The tracks left mirrored impressions in the puddles, perfect and temporary. Behind us, the church stood roofless, its bell half buried in the mud, a silent witness to a war that had already forgotten its reasons. In my logbook, I added one line beneath the entry for the fired shell. Enemy neutralized. Civilian survived. That was all command would ever read. But to me it was a kind of equation solved, one act of defiance equaling one village spared. And though no medal would mark it, I felt something settle inside me, steady and irreversible, like a bearing finally seated true. The next morning the hills smelled of thawing soil and cordite. Bavaria lay under a lid of fog, the kind that made every sound hesitant, like the world was deciding whether to continue. We bivouacked in a field near a collapsed bridge. Engineers hammered planks, medics cleaned instruments, and somewhere a chaplain read scripture to an audience too tired to stand. I sat on an ammo crate, helmet off, staring at the condensation rising from the tank's armor like ghosts leaving steel. At 0800 a courier jeep arrived, gray mud on the tires, a white star fading under grime. The driver handed me a sealed envelope. The heading read Headquarters, 3rd Armored Division, Administrative Action Report. Inside, a single page. Lieutenant James O'Connor is to report to Field Command Post, Hinterfeld Sector, for preliminary hearing regarding unauthorized engagement, April 26, 1945, 0900 hours. I folded it carefully, placed it in my breast pocket, and started walking. The command post was a farmhouse turned into an office, roof half gone, walls sandbagged. Inside, a kerosene stove burned with a thin blue flame. Major Charles Whitman sat behind a folding desk, uniform immaculate, pencil lined with precision along a pad of carbon copies. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. Sit, Lieutenant. I did. He looked up once, eyes gray as the morning. You understand why you're here? Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. He studied me, perhaps waiting for fear or apology. I gave him neither. The silence stretched until it became part of the furniture. Then he said, explain. I told him. The optics, the SS, the machine G*N, the civilians, the detonator. I gave him range estimates, weather conditions, ammunition type, the fuse delay on the M48 high-explosive round. I described it like a report from a maintenance log, cold, precise, without color. When I finished, he tapped the pencil once on the desk. Do you realize the potential political consequences if you were wrong? Yes, sir. I was not wrong. He flipped through a second folder, a scout report, maybe the infantry findings. His eyes moved slower now. The charges in the church? Confirmed by Sergeant Hanley's men, sir. Wired to the bell frame. He read in silence, lips moving faintly. Then he closed the folder. Your sh*T prevented detonation of approximately 50 kilograms of high explosive. If it had gone off during civilian approach, casualties would have exceeded 100. He stood, paced once behind the desk. Officially, Lieutenant, this didn't happen. No unauthorized fire, no civilians, no church. You understand? Yes, sir. He looked almost relieved. Good. Get back to your men. I saluted. He returned it with mechanical precision, then added quietly, for what it's worth, you did the right thing. Just not the proper one. Outside, the fog had thinned. The sun caught on wet grass, making it look briefly golden. When I reached the tank, the crew was cleaning the main G*N, laughter in short, tired bursts. Price had painted a small red lion on the barrel, the unit symbol, newly bright under the grime. Vittel, I looked up. So, what did the major say? We heroes or criminals? Neither, I said. We're invisible. They laughed because it was safer than thinking. By afternoon, the village sent a few of their own, older men, a handful of women, to bring bread and water in chipped bowls. One boy carried a wooden toy truck missing a wheel. He approached the tank timidly, looked up at me, and said in halting English, "Tank, saw us." Then he smiled, shy and uncertain, as if unsure he was allowed to thank someone made of armor. When he left, I sat on the turret and watched the road east. Columns of German prisoners shuffled past, hands raised, faces hollowed by hunger and disbelief. The war was ending one surrender at a time. Yet behind each bent back trailed the weight of everything we'd broken to reach this silence. That evening, as the light bled from the sky, I took out the envelope and tore it into strips. The pieces drifted into the fire like white leaves. The ink curled, then vanished. Margaret's last letter was folded in my map case. I read it again. You said once you wanted to fix what was broken. Did you? I thought of the crater near the church, of the small crowd still breathing because one man had ignored a sentence printed in red ink. I wanted to tell her yes, but fixing in war never looks like repair. It looks like prevention, like one less grave. When darkness came, I climbed into the tank, closed the hatch, and listened to the cooling metal tick. Somewhere outside, the boys' laughter carried over the field, faint, fragile, alive. After the surrender, the world exhaled. Bavaria turned green again. We were told to keep moving east until we reached the River Lech, then wait for the British. Orders written in ink, delivered in trucks that still smelled of gasoline and fatigue. The roads were lined with prisoners, gray uniforms, hands raised, eyes already elsewhere. The SS men hid their insignia beneath blankets. We pretended not to notice. The Red Lion survived the last week of the war without another sh*T fired. The engine coughed black smoke but held together. In early May, they parked us outside a monastery converted into a hospital. I slept 3 nights in the driver's seat because the ground felt too soft, too foreign. When I finally stepped out, the silence was unbearable. No radio, no orders, no reason to wake except habit. Demobilization came like a rumor that hardened into reality. Paperwork thicker than conscience. They handed me a discharge form and a train ticket. You've done your part, Lieutenant. That was all. No debrief, no medal, no reprimand. Just a new kind of quiet. Ohio smelled the same but smaller. The garage had dust on every wrench. My father had passed the year before. A neighbor left the telegram on the workbench. I read it once, folded it, and went back to work. Engines were easier to understand than grief. A seized piston made sense, you could see the scar. Margaret waited at the station with hair shorter than I remembered and eyes older than mine. We married that summer under a sky so blue it felt indecent. I built a new shop behind the house, painted it the same dull green as the Sherman. Sometimes, when a carburetor refused to start, I caught myself using the same tone I'd used with the crew, patient, unyielding. She heard it too. She never said a word. Years passed like orderly columns, 2 children, 2 mortgages, a country learning to forget. The newspapers printed victory stories, never footnotes. I never spoke of Hinterfeld, not even when whiskey loosened my tongue. The official record had erased it, and erasures are contagious. But history has its own persistence. In 1963, a letter arrived from Germany. The envelope was thin, the handwriting uncertain. Lucas Steiner, the name signed at the bottom. He wrote that he had been the boy with the wooden truck, that his village still remembered the man who fired once. Each April, he said, they gathered by the ruined church. The bell had been melted into a memorial plaque. The inscription read, "To the soldier who saw through the smoke and saved us all." I read it twice, then folded it back into its envelope. Margaret asked, "Old army friend?" "Something like that," I said. In '69, Lucas sent a photograph. A dozen villagers standing beside the rebuilt bell tower, holding candles. The plaque gleamed under rain. A little girl in the front held a yellow flower. On the back of the photo he'd written, "You didn't fire to destroy. You fired to stop the darkness." That sentence stayed on my desk for the rest of my life. When my son turned 18 and spoke about joining the service, I told him one thing only: learn the difference between a rule and a reason. He nodded, not yet understanding. Most don't until they're standing in rain with a finger on a trigger. Sometimes, in the shop, I'd pause when the compressor hissed. For a heartbeat, it sounded like rain on armor. The ghosts of that morning still lived in the rhythm of tools, in the smell of oil and burnt metal. I never chased them away. They reminded me that a man's worth is not measured by obedience, but by the lives that continue in silence because he once refused to wait. Every year, Lucas's letters grew rarer, but the handwriting steadied. He became the mayor of Hinterfeld, rebuilt the school, planted trees along the road where the column had once moved. His last note arrived in 1985, "The children here call you the man of the Red Lion. They ask if you were real. I tell them yes, because truth should not depend on paperwork." I never wrote back. Words would have made it smaller. Now, when the rain comes heavy against the workshop roof, I hear again that single sh*T rolling down the valley, the pause afterward when the world waited to decide what kind of men we were. No medals, no headlines, just a quiet act folded into history's mechanics. Some nights, I dream of the bell tower standing clean against a clear sky, the bronze plaque catching light, the sound of a child laughing where the G*N once spoke. It is enough. His name never made the history books. The report was buried under layers of ink, its truth dissolved into procedure. But in officer schools, Fort Knox, Fort Benning, places where young men still learn to obey, his story travels like a rumor. They call it the Hinterfeld question. An instructor writes it on a chalkboard: "What if the order is wrong, and you know it?" Cadets shift in their seats. Someone finally says, "Then you disobey." The instructor nods. Then you do what that one commander did, the man who fired once, and saved hundreds. Outside, rain taps the windows. It sounds like memory. Somewhere far across the ocean, a bell still rings every April, marking the moment a soldier looked through the fog, saw clearly, and chose conscience over command.